Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining again. This is lesson number 2 of the Spring Security Fundamentals new series that I've started. Good to see that there are many people already here and I hope you will enjoy this lesson. I encourage you as usually to share your thoughts and questions in the live chat in case you are here live with me. And of course, don't forget that you can always have questions and share them in the comments section or share them with me on Twitter and on LinkedIn where we can meet as well. So have a good day everyone wherever you are, and let's begin our today's discussion, which is about how to manage users. In the last lesson, which was actually the first one, we made a good introduction on authentication and authorization, and we even created the first Spring Boot project. But the only thing that we did was to mostly understand the basic, convention setup Spring Boot makes. So what we'll try today to do is to customize our user management, which is done, as you will learn today, by the UserDetails service object. So UserDetails service is actually an interface, it's a contract. It's the contract between Spring Security and your application, through which Spring Security knows how to obtain the user details. So this way, by implementing the UserDetails service interface, you create an object, you put it in the context, and you this way give Spring Security the way in which the framework obtains the details about the user. So that means you have basically your choice in which you can store the users. If you'd like to put them in a database, you can put them in a database. If you'd like to take them from a web service, you can take them from a web service. If you have them somewhere else, you can take them from there. And the only thing you need to provide is a user details service implementation for that. So with that being said, let me start by drawing what I like to say. First of all, I'd like to make you aware and draw the authentication architecture. And like I started in my previous lesson, I will use my new tablet here. And the first thing I would like to make you aware is that when we discuss about web applications, we have this so-called filter chain. So we have multiple filters, potentially multiple filters, and the request, this arrow is the HTTP request. Of course, I should have also a response, so I can draw back a line which is a response, and these are the filters. And you can have multiple filters, and at the very end you end into the servlet. Okay, so this is, we don't really care today too much about servlets, but somewhere when you use Spring MVC, somewhere behind the scenes you have a dispatcher servlet. Okay, so this is the dispatcher servlet, which in the end ends up in your controller. So you design the controller and you don't really care too much today about all this part, but you need to know they are here. And why are they important for Spring Security? Is because, well, these filters, they do implement the authentication and authorization in Spring Security. So Spring Security is based on filters, you know. Oh, I didn't share the screen. Oh, sorry, my fault. So I was just drawing and you were looking at me. So yeah, thank you very much for letting me know. So I was saying these are the filters, okay? And you don't really care too much. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and in the very end you have the servlet. Yes guys, sorry for that. I understand that I didn't share the screen. Now you should see my screen, hopefully. So again, filter 1, filter 2, and then it ends up in the servlet, and then you have the controller. Okay, this is what I was saying. You don't care too much about this part anymore, because mainly from here you implement the application. So here is where you have controller and then the service and then whatever your application is. But very important, oh, I changed the file. Okay, very important is you need to learn that Spring Security starts in a web application from the filters. So this filter can be the authentication filter, and whenever the request, okay, this is the HTTP request, whenever the request enters the filter chain, which is this one, so this is the filter chain, the authentication filter delegates to a so-called authentication manager. So this is an authentication manager here. Okay, and the authentication manager is an object whose purpose is to find the way in which they can authenticate the users, and that's implemented by objects who are named the authentication providers. And we do have only one authentication manager, but you can have one or multiple authentication providers, although you mainly, as we will discuss later in more details, have only one. Just remember that theoretically you can implement more authentication providers, which means you might have multiple ways, multiple authentication logic implementations. But let's simplify for the moment and think that we only have one authentication provider. If that one authentication provider uses the username and password credentials, then whenever an authentication provider needs username and passwords, they do have to use two components. One of the components is named the UserDetails service. So this is the UserDetails service. And this is basically exactly what we want to implement today. So this is basically what we want to implement today. And of course, then once it grabs the user details, usually the password is hashed somehow, and we discussed about hashing and encryption and encoding last time. Although I do have to make a correction and say that meanwhile somebody convinced me that Caesar cipher is encryption and not encoding, but well, you still got the idea. Encoding is just a mathematical transformation. Encryption is when you need to have a secret to get from the output to the input. And hash is that function where you can't go from the output to the input anymore, but there is always a way to find out if an input matches an output. And that's how you usually encode your passwords, using hash functions. So this is the password encoder. Okay, so we want to understand how can we define our own user detail service. That's what we do. And what I didn't say is that let's take it one by one. So the HTTP request comes in. This is the authentication filter. The authentication filter delegates to the authentication manager, and then the authentication manager finds an appropriate authentication provider. If the authentication provider needs credentials, then it will search and use a user details service and the password encoder to get the user details and also validate the password. And then if the validation is correct, so the authentication succeeds, it goes back, and at the very end, the last thing that happens, and I will just mention this today, but we will go into more details about it later in the next lessons, it stores the authentication object in a security context. So with that being said, I think it's time to write some code. What we want to do today is create our own user details service and use a database to store the users. To make things simple, I will only store the users, but later on we will learn also how to store the roles or authorities, and we will also learn how to store the hashed passwords if needed. So I'm already have an IntelliJ here, so I will create a new project. And my new project, let's just choose the same naming convention like I did last week. C2E1 will be, so Spring Security 2022, Lesson 2, and then Example 1. And then I'm, of course, still using the latest long-term supported version. And then the only thing that what I need is actually to have the web dependency. Then I do need Spring Security. I will choose to use a MySQL database to make things very simple. So for that, to connect to that, I need a Spring Data, and I will choose Spring Data JPA for the time being, but you can do the same thing with Spring Data JDBC. And if you have a reactive application, which we'll probably do later in the next lessons, you will need to use, of course, R2DBC. But for today, Spring Data JPA. And then whatever else we need, I guess I will make a good use of Lombok. Just to save some time from writing getters and setters and constructors. So Spring Web Security, Data JPA, and Lombok, I guess they are enough for me. So let me create this project. Okay, this is my window. And it should fortunately be just indexing very quickly all the dependencies, and once the indexing ends, I will start by creating the table, creating a database for me, creating a table users, and then mapping the entities in my project. So we can see now the indexing is done. I have no database here, but I will just name my database Spring Security Lesson 2, and I will create a new schema, and inside this schema I will create a table users, and for simplicity I will just have an ID, which will be an auto incremented primary key, a username, and for the moment, again, to make things simple, I will just store the password in plain text, but later on in the next lessons, I will make sure that oh, okay, MySQL dependency. Someone tells me I forgot MySQL dependency. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Yes, of course, we need the MySQL dependency. Otherwise, we will not be able to use MySQL. Basically, whenever you use relational databases, you need to have the driver. Thank you very much for making me aware. Probably we would have seen when starting the application that something is wrong. So, but since you told me, let's make sure we add it in our dependencies from the very beginning. So this is the driver, indexing again, and should be fine. Cool. Going back here. So I was saying that I will, for the moment, for simplicity reasons and allow you focus on what I write, I will just store the password in plain text, the passwords in plain text, but later we will learn how to store users and hash the passwords in the database. So hang there with me, because I won't leave you like this. Don't do this in real world applications. This only works in examples when you want to take the things slowly. But never ever store passwords in plain text in a real world app. So for me, let's just say I have only one user, Bill, with password 12345, and that's basically what we should see. We should be able to use to log in to call one of our resources. That's what I'm gonna do. So now if I'm going back to my application, I can create a controllers package, and in the controllers package only have a demo endpoint. That is our resource. So REST controller, and then our demo endpoint, which simply returns something. If I'm running the application right now, I will only be able to call the application. If I'm using, for example, a Postman, I will only be able to call the application using potentially the default username and password. Why? Because I didn't write any Spring Security configuration, but you already know that, so we don't have to do that now. I would suggest skip over the default configuration and then directly write our configuration, which means in a config package, I will create a security config class, and then there I will declare the two beans I really need, which is the user details service and the password encoder. So security config, okay, and then configuration. So Alexander, I have a question about, in regards to classification of authentication mechanisms. Some very old books and Java tutorials developed by Oracle claim that there are 4 kinds: basic, form-based, digest, certificate. Yes, this is true actually, but for the moment we only discuss about HTTP basic, and I will later on go on classifying the authentication type. So hang there with me. I will take it step by step, and I promise you I will discuss multiple ways of authentication, including of course the OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. So I won't be able to answer you all these questions right now because it's only lesson 2, but in the next lesson, step by step, we will get into all this, okay? Cool. So going back, what I was saying is that I definitely need to add the user details service as a bean in the context, and for the moment let's just put return null here because we don't know which will be the name of the class we implement yet. We didn't do that yet, so we have to do it. And then of course we need a password encoder, but since I for the moment store the password in plain text, I will hang with the no-op password encoder, which you know that will later on, because yeah, it's crossed out with for a reason. You should not use this in a production app, but later on we will replace it with, for example, bookcrypt. So for the moment it's just to avoid complicating our example, okay? So in order to do that, well, we need a user details service, which fortunately for us, it's a very, very simple contract. So from our implementation, Spring Security only needs one method, which is a method that gets the username and returns the user details as a return. So as a parameter, you have the username considered unique, and then the return type will be the user details. So that's what we need to implement. So I can simply just go here, create a package services, and in the package services I would create, for example, a custom, let's say JPA user details service, which will just be an implementation of the user details service contract, meaning of course that it's mandatory I override the abstract method. And I have of course here now the option that I would either say here new JPA, so my implementation, I can do this, or alternatively, if you'd like, you can use the at service stereotype annotation on the class. So it's your choice here what you choose. It's either you make it a bean using the bean annotation, or you mark it with a stereotype annotation. But the very important thing is, of course, it needs to be a bean in the context. Will you create OAuth 2 client applications using JWT and JWK? Yes, I will do that in the future tutorials. Yes, in the future tutorials I will do that. So let me take this step by step. I promise you this should be a playlist where everyone starting from zero will understand how Spring Security works. Good, so that's basically what I need to implement. So to do that, I need a repository, and to have a repository, I first need a way to represent the entities. So remember, I'm using Spring Data JPA, so that means I need to map the tables that represents entities in my database with classes, and the class I need is user, which will be a map for the users table here. So since the class is named user and the table is users, for those of you hopefully knowing a little bit already about JPA, you know that I need to provide the name using the table annotation. So guys, this is a Spring Security, it's a kind of intermediate plus playlist. So I do expect you should know the basics of Spring here, and I do expect you know the basics of JPA already. Some unit testing, so it's not an entry level, it's a from zero to hero Spring Security playlist, but I still need you know, first of all, need to understand and know very well Spring before, and a few things aside from Spring. So that's why I'm not explaining all this, okay? And then I say, okay, it's ID, which is my primary key, and then generated value. If I correctly remember, I used the identity. I made it auto increment, although it's irrelevant because we will not create users here, but let's make it correct. And I have the username and I have the password. And of course, this should be private as well. And then I'm using Lombok to make things simple. So let's just say getter and setter here to have the getters and the setters, and that should be everything I need. So you see how simply I made the mapping between my table and created this entity. And with that being said, it should be enough for me to create the repository for the user, which, because I'm using Spring Data JPA, it would simply be an interface. And this interface will extend JPA repository for user and the type of the primary key, which in my case happens to be integer. Be very careful what class you import here. So it should be the one from our entities package. So don't mess up. There is a class user also from Spring Security. By chance, now we have the same names. Be careful when you import to specify the correct package here. And then I definitely need a method to get the user by username, because you saw already that Spring Security relies on the username. So we need to provide Spring Security with a way to find the user in the database by username. So let's call it find user by username. So we have string username, and of course theoretically I can leave the method this way because the name will be automatically translated by Spring Data into the query, but I usually don't like to do that. I usually prefer to specify on purpose the query annotation. So I will just write here, select u from user u where username equals username. So it's clear and easy to read. And then I will inject my user repository. Please be very mindful, we don't need the at repository annotation. I see this in many examples. Many developers simply copy paste this without thinking about it. Remember that the at repository annotation is not something you use on interfaces, so it's not needed to use a stereotype annotation here. The stereotype annotations in Spring, their purpose is to create an instance of that type in Spring's context, but interfaces and abstract classes, they are abstract types, so you never use stereotype annotations with those. When you will see these kinds of examples on the internet where people use at repository over the interface, it's wrong. It doesn't do anything, it will work, but it's not needed. You just put it there for nothing. So that's an advice from my side. And of course now I just can say private final user repository, import the type, and then place the all-args constructor over the class so that I get everything injected through the class constructor. So my repository is now coming from Spring context. And the only thing I need to do is say my user is find username by, and username that comes here by parameter, which will be sent by Spring Security when it tries to get the user details. And you see that username not found exception is recommended to be thrown here when the username doesn't exist. But what you will see is that this is a runtime exception actually, which means that if you leave it in the throws clause, it's only for documentation reasons. So at the very end, we will take it out. And now we just have to find a way to return this user, because what happens is that I will not simply be able to return the user this way. First of all, it's an optional. Secondly, is defined by a class which is not recognized by Spring Security. One of the second things that you will see now is that Spring Security doesn't recognize any way of creating the user, any way of describing the user. It has to implement another contract, another one of the basic contracts in Spring Security, which is named UserDetails. So if you go into this, you will see this is an interface, and all the methods it contains are related to the way Spring Security understands the user. Although I will tell you later that I disagree with the fact that we have these 4 Boolean methods here and the way they are named, but this is, let's say, some design issue Spring Security has since its very first version, so I doubt this will change anymore. But what we need to do, however, now, if we really want this to work, is to represent the user here as a user details. And we have, design-wise, we have we have a lot of possibilities, or at least 3 of them I can think about now. One of them would be to simply implement here user details, but I don't like this choice. I don't like to implement user details here because it pollutes a lot the entity, and then the entity will also have 2 responsibilities, which is kind of against the first solid principle, which is single responsibility. You remember that usually a contract, an implementation, an object, and even a method, you try to design it to have only one purpose, only one reason to change. And it's clear that if I implement here the user details contract, it at least has 2 reasons to change. That would be the fact it's an entity, so you would change it whenever you change the entity, and that the fact that it's a user details, Spring Security user details, that means you have to change that whenever something changes with Spring Security. So it's clear that it's against the first solid principle, and that's something not good, isn't it? We try to keep as much as possible and be aware and make our code designed through the lens of the solid principles and other principles such as dry keys, Yagni, and so on. So let's avoid implementing the user details here. But what other choice we have? So if we can't implement user details, what other choice? Well, a different choice would be to use a mapper. Like you create a different class and then you map the user details from here to that instance. So it's a copy of the data from the user to the instance. But the one I like the most is actually the third one, which is decorating. Actually, it's even adapting in this case. So I'm adapting the entity. I'm using an adapter pattern, which is very, very similar to the decorator pattern actually. So the 2 are very close one to the other. But the purpose here it's one of an adapter, because what I will try to do is adapt the entity to the interface, to the contract recognized by Spring Security. And for those of you who don't know how decorator pattern or adapter pattern look like, I have a playlist there on this same channel where you can check that. What I will do, I will just create a separate package called security, and let's create a class that we name security user, and I will show you how I adapt the entity user to the new class security user, which whose purpose will be to implement the contract known by Spring Security. So security user, and the security user, it's a must, it implements user details because that's what we want in the end. And of course, since it implements user details, it's a must, it overrides all the abstract methods, isn't it? So this is everything we need to implement. So it's quite unfortunate the order in which they have been overridden. So let me try to put them at least into an order that is more easy for us to understand while we discuss about this. And the security user, what we'll actually do is that it will decorate an instance of type user. So user, and then this user, again, be very sure you import the correct one. So it should be the one from entities. And all-args constructor from Lombok will help us avoid writing the constructor. This way, when you create a security user, you just wrap a user, you are wrapping it over a user, and then you don't need to copy the detail, just delegate to the user itself. So you just say whenever Spring Security calls on a security user instance, the get username method, it should actually get it from here. And you can do the same with the password. So say user get password, and then this is the part that I will skip today. So what I will do today, I will return a list of one implementation of granted authority, but allow me skip this for today. And in the next lesson, I will start from the example we have created now, and I will show you how to enhance it with roles or authorities in the database. For the moment, the only thing you might remember is that the granted authority, this is an interface again, and is the interface that represents what we call in Spring Security authorities or roles, and they represent what the user is allowed to do. At some point, we will have actions or badges that will give our users privileges. But for the moment, let's make it static. Let's just have a list of only one implementation. I was able to implement it via a lambda expression because, as you could see, it only has one method, so it's a functional interface. So I could just write it like this. See, so it's no parameters and it returns a string, no parameters and it returns a string. It actually returns the name of the role in this case. So let's keep it for the moment. Just focus on the user details. And then all the other four methods are related to the possibility in Spring Security to have an account expired, locked, to have the credentials expired, or to have it enabled or disabled. Again, I will skip on this information now because it's irrelevant for us, and we can simply make all four methods return true so that our user can never expire, our credentials can never expire, it's always enabled, and so on and so forth. So I will just start from this very, very simple representation of the user. So you see it now, because security user is a user details and it wraps over the user from the database, I can very simply go back, and what I will write here, so I took the user as an optional, and I can say you map from the optional, if there is a value, to the security user object, or else, which means if it doesn't exist, if there is no such user, if the optional was empty, then throw a username not found exception with a message such as username not found, and we can even put the name of the user here. So username not found exception is a particular implementation of authentication exception, which is what is recommended to throw in the case the user doesn't exist, so the username is not found. And you can actually take it out from here. You don't need to put it as a throws clause because it's not a checked exception. So syntactically speaking, you don't need to have a throws clause for it. But that's basically how I expect it should look like. So it should look like this way. Okay, let me check again your questions and discussions, see if it's something important. Didn't find the auth client part. Okay, I will make sure I will create that as well. So patience, my dear friends, and you will have everything in this probably long, again, it will be probably a very long playlist. Favor of composition over inheritance. Yes, that's a very good principle. You should always favor that, but mind that it doesn't matter, you would not have contracts anymore. And okay, that's it. I still don't have other questions. So I created the implementation of my UserDetails service. I'm sure it's now in the context. It tells me one problem. Okay, fine. So okay, makes sense. So now it's a bit more difficult because you see here, I would need to, if I do it like this with the @bin, then what I would need to do is something like private final user repository, then have the OAuth constructor method here, and then provide it here this way, which is something I don't agree with. So I don't recommend you complicate your security configurations like this. It's much more easier if you simply quit using the @bin completely here. Okay, so just leave the password encoder and then just allow Spring do its duty by annotating the class with stereotype annotation, because that's much easier now. So you now very easily know that this will be created because of its annotation. Then you have the UserDetails service that will be created behind the scenes by Spring Data. It will be injected and everything works nicely. So much better in this case. So we only need here the definition of our password encoder. And with that being said, I think that's the only thing we need to do. So if I'm going here to actually start, oh, I can't start the application because in my resource files, I forgot to put the details about the connection to the database. So we should do that as well. Let's wait now for it to build and I will close it. I will add the connection to the database and then we see if our implementation works as expected, which I do expect it works fine. So let me prove that. Let me prove that and then let's take a look again on our implementation, make sure that we understand it properly. And if time allows us, we might even be able today to go on the roles. Okay, so data source URL should be JDBC, MySQL in my case, localhost, and what was the name of the database? It was ss_lesson2, and then the username in my case it's root, and I don't have a password, but that's only on my local computer for demonstration purposes. So don't ever do something like this for a real example. I know this is not secure. You should never do something like this, like use the root for an application. You should always have the list and fulfill the least privileged principle. But it works for our example. It's only an example. So we look, you see the Hikari pool has been created, initialized, and in less than 11 seconds our application started. And we know we have this demo. And if I'm going to Postman, I should be able to create a get HTTP localhost 8080, the default port, demo. And if I start by not using any authentication just to make sure the security part works, you see we get a 401 unauthorized, which is exactly what we expected. But then if we use the default HTTP basic and we properly use the credentials we have in the database, we should be able to prove that the status back is 200 OK and the authentication properly works. So that's fine. It means our implementation now knows how to take from the database the users, and it properly works with our record in the database. Okay. So good, it's basically what we expected, and we still have a lot of time, and I hope the things are clear for you. And if that's the case, then I can even show you how to add authorities. So we can even try to do that, add authorities to our implementation. So that means, first of all, I'd like you to understand, because I simply made it here hard-coded. So this list of authorities that I have hard-coded here, this is the list of actions that one can do, and based on these actions we will be able later to add the authorization configurations. So let me see if I can still share my screen here. And hopefully I will be able to share my screen again. Bear with me, guys, because I want to present again what I'm writing here. Let's say erase this, and then what I wanted to tell you is that we have the user, and then the user has granted authorities, they are called. So this is granted authorities, and these granted authorities can be represented as either authorities or roles. And you have to understand that basically it's only a conceptual difference between what authorities mean and what roles mean, but behind the scenes this interface named granted authority is the only one, fortunately, that we will use to implement either authorities or roles. So there is nothing special. There is nothing special for roles and special for authorities. It's the same contract, granted authority, representing both of them. And it's basically exactly the one that we have been using here. This is the only one, the granted authority. But from a conceptual perspective, the authority is an action. So what the authority means? The authority is an action. Is an action that the user can do in your application. The user might be able to read, might be able to write, delete, execute something. It's usually represented by a verb, while the role is a badge. It's a badge that's usually represented by a subject like admin, manager, client, visitor, and so on. So you see the difference is that it depends how you want to represent how you want to implement the authorities, the authority rules, the authority restrictions in your application. If you want to have actions, granular actions, and represent the authorization configurations based on actions, you want to allow the user, the logged in user to do something, then you use authorities. If you want to badge your user somehow and tell you are an admin, and as an admin you know you have some actions that all the admins can do, then that is a role. But technically speaking, it's only one contract behind the scenes. So it doesn't matter if we discuss authorities or roles. It's still only one contract behind the scenes. The granted authority. So how does Spring Security manage the authentication manager now? one used to override the method, but now it's not clear. Well, we will actually override the method, but again, I will take them slowly. At this moment, we used, and if you've seen the previous lesson, we are using the default configurations, the convention, which is implemented by Spring Boot. But at some point, we will not actually override the method anymore. You will see it's web security configure adapter is not used anymore. I will teach you a different way, a newer way, but it's still a very easy way using security filter chain bin, which will allow you to set a different authentication provider, not a manager. The manager is always the same. The authentication provider is what you will implement yourself, okay? But that will come later when we take it step by step to make sure I tell you absolutely all the details, okay? So for the moment, indeed, as some of you are already pointing out here, we use a default authentication provider and the default filter, and that's what is working, and we are only focusing on the users. But later on, I will show you how to implement your custom authentication, and you will see it's not difficult at all. Okay, so what I wanted to do now is that you understood the difference between authorities and roles and which is the contract representing them, is that I can basically just go here, create a table, let's name it authorities. Did I write the name correctly? I hope so. And say have ID and the name for the authority. And again, to make it very, very simple, because we don't want to focus now on complicated things. We want to allow you focus on Spring Security. I'm just going to add like one authority. And then what I'm going to do is I will create a link between the authorities and the users. So we create this link table, and let's say user ID, and it shouldn't be a primary key because it's a foreign key. And then we have authority ID, which should be again an int. And this is the link table, the relationship table, because it will be a many-to-many relationship, okay? It's a many-to-many relationship between the two. So I have an authority read, which has the ID 1, and then I have a user which has the ID 1, and let's make sure the user and the authority are linked. So for some reason, most likely because I don't have a primary key, I can't simply update it this way, but no worries, I can always insert into this table values 1 and 1. That's everything I want. Okay, so let's do it like this, and let's validate the insert is correct. Good. And now I'm going back, and you already know what I'm going to do. You already know that. You already know that because the only thing that I'm going to do is create the authority entity. And then we will mark it as an entity. And I will say private int ID. It's an ID. Generated value, in my case, identity. And then I have private string name. And then just use longblock getter and setter annotations. And then of course I need to create the relationship between them. So let's say private set of user. These are the users. And I can use the many-to-many relationship. Say it's mapped by, and then I need to have a map by field in the other side of the relationship, isn't it? So it's a private set of users, of authority. This will be here, and name it authorities. I correctly, hopefully, import the set. and then I have many-to-many, and what do I actually need to do here is to use on this side will be the join table. Okay, so I say on the first side, the authority, it will be the name of the field from the users, like this way. And on the other one, we'll have the many-to-many join table, and then I have to provide the name of the table, which is this one. And then I have the join column, which is join column name, and this is the, I guess it's user ID. And then I need to also provide the inverse join column, which is join column name. And let me check it out again. Authority ID. Authority ID. I think this should be it. With only one thing to mention, I guess, we will need to make the fetch on the authorities eager, because I'm pretty sure that if we don't do that, Spring Security, I will explain it, but let's start by making it eager, and then I will explain why I do this. Because I have a feeling that it won't work if we don't make it eager, and I might be even able to prove you and explain you why I have this feeling. But the idea is now what I need to do. So I will basically do the same thing for the collection of authorities, no? Because what I did here is I have only provided a mean of getting the set of authorities for a user by the relationship I created. So that's basically it. So I'm just going now to have a way in which we represent the authority, and of course I could have again make this implement the granted authority interface, but remember what we discussed for the user. I don't want to do that because I don't want to have two responsibilities in the same class. So to avoid that, I will basically do the same thing that I did for the user. I will create a wrapper. So I'll create a wrapper named security authority. And this will implement the granted authority interface, the one that we said represents the authorities and roles. And then we override the only one method. We make sure it wraps over an authority entity. And the only thing it does, it returns the name of the authority, because that's the only thing Spring Security needs. Okay, class can be a record. Oh, excuse me. Yes, we use Java 17, and classes that are completely immutable can be records. I do agree at all. It could have been a record, but since I've used Lombok throughout the whole application, let's keep it with Lombok. Okay, cool. Yeah, but it could have been a record. I agree with that. And now what I'm going to do is going to the user. Not to the user, to the security user, of course, and this is the last thing I need to change to make my application recognize authorities from the database. I just need now to say here, I return from the user all the authorities. This is the set of authorities which I'm going to stream and map to security authority new, and then collect to a list or a set or whatever you'd like to have here. So that should be it. That should work now as my user from the database. I missed the table name authorities. Very good observation. Thank you very much. So I did name authorities. You see, Its authority is the name, and authority the name of the class. So if I will not add the table annotation, then it's for sure that Hibernate will complain because it doesn't recognize the name. So let's make sure I take exactly the name I gave it here and I put it here. Very good. Thank you very much for being so attentive. So now it should be fine. I hopefully didn't mess anything here. If I did, I guess we will see that, but that was a very, very good observation. Thank you very much. So with that being said, I should be able to restart the application, hoping that I didn't miss anything. If I did, I will probably either be able to correct it now or next time, but if everything is right, then I can prove that we get the authorities from the database as well. So first of all, let's make sure it works this way. So I'm just going to send again the request. And if I get a 401, something is not good. So it says unknown column user ID in authorities. And that means user ID in authorities. That means it actually tries to find. So I have a many-to-many here, which is fine. And then I said user ID here, so I would have expected to find it this way. Field list. I dislike when this happens. So it's many-to-many, and then I didn't miss anything here. I have the join correctly done, but it still complains it doesn't find the user ID. I'm pretty sure I'm something that I'm missing, definitely. And this is authorities, mapped by authorities in this class. Okay, so very strange. Very strange because it looks like it doesn't recognize it as a many-to-many relationship for some reason. So yeah, it's not user ID in the database, is it? Because I've copied it correctly, hopefully. So it's user ID, authority ID. So it should find them by the names the way I provided them here in the join table. Users, authorities, join columns. Because I'm pretty sure I didn't have to put something else. But it looks it doesn't want to compile with me. So what should we do in that case to make sure it works? Should we maybe try to create it with the name it expects? Authority user ID. No. No, I don't think. I totally doubt it's related anyhow to having the bidirectional one. So I really doubt if I do something like this it will work. But let's try. Then I have the map by and the join table on the owner, mapped by on the opposite of the owner. Very strange. Very, very strange. Okay, well, still the same thing. So as I guessed, it shouldn't be related to this one. It's something that I'm probably missing here. Let me sure the authority I imported is correct. Oh, I think this is it. No, it's because it's in the same package. And join column name is correct. Oh, this is strange. I already start to get angry about this. So I have a join table. It's a many-to-many relationship. what can be wrong? Users, authorities. So the correct join table this way. Okay, should I try to actually name it user ID just to see if it works? No, I don't need authority repository either. It's not related to that. So let me just try one thing. If I can't manage it, I promise I will be back next lesson with a solution, which is again not related at all from what you can see. It's not related at all with Spring Security, it's with JPA, but yes, I should know JPA very well as well, so I'm not really happy that this doesn't work for me now, because I tend to believe that I'm an expert in JPA as well, and something like this is very, very, let's call it fundamental from my perspective, so I shouldn't have problems with creating this kind of many-to-many relationship. But you know, you can't say you always know them all or you are perfect, so I guess that should be, but that means it should be here, user ID, this way. I have a feeling that something else is wrong, and I don't know exactly what. Oh no, the ID, sorry, this one. I wouldn't close the stream, but it's over 1 hour, and I'm very tired at this point. It has been a long day for me. I am still working, and I have a job. But yeah, let's try to see if we can figure out what's wrong. Okay, it seems that this really worked, which is kind of strange. I mean, the purpose of the join column annotation is to be able to override the name of the column in the table. So at this moment I'm really confused. I don't know why it was still looking for the defaults, because I feel something is not right here. Like when you use the join column, I could have, to understand me properly, I could have completely removed the join table and use the defaults that the JPA implementation uses. But when you use the join table, which is usually what I'm doing, I prefer to avoid using defaults. And the reason I prefer to avoid using defaults is because, well, let's say it's very easy to forget which are the defaults. It's very easy to confuse developers this way. And what I'm doing usually is that I'm using the annotations to override this very specifically for that. So now what happens, it seems this works now, and I will make sure it works. I will try to print what's in the database to make sure, what we get from the database to make sure. But the idea is that it's very, very strange. I had to actually like use the names here exactly how they are expected. Look, because what I did, and you can see what I did here, I just renamed the columns, but that shouldn't be the case, because, well, the whole purpose of this is to have the possibility to override the names of the columns, to give them whatever names you want. And I will have to research this. And come back to you about why was it needed to actually use the defaults here, because it's not clear for me. It can be even a bug, but let's not blame anyone until we are sure about that. I don't want to say it's a bug before I'm pretty sure about that. It might be a bug only in my brain here, because I'm very tired. It's late today, and maybe that's everything. But okay, it's working now. And let's, as a last thing, because we are already 4 minutes past that, as a last thing, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say var u security context holder. And that's something I will teach you in one of the next lessons, is that you can access anywhere you want the logged in, the authenticated user, which is basically at the very end added to this so-called security context. And then what I will do is that I will try to print all the authorities for this user. So let's just say system out them, okay. To see if we really took them correctly from the security from the database and put them in the security context. Okay, so let's basically test this now and see it works right. So you can either that or use a debug breakpoint here if you want. So you can do something like this. Okay. Oh, and okay, we don't have a toString. So let's actually better use a debug and look with the debugger directly in the objects. Okay, so I'm going to send again the request. No, too early, I guess. I will try again. And now it stopped in the debugger, and you can easily see now what this U here contains. So you can just try to either evaluate or watch on it. And you can see the authorities we got. It's only one authority, which is read, which is fine. It's exactly what we got from the database, so our relationship worked. And you can see the principal, who is the user Bill. And we still have the password, which is something strange, because I usually would have expected the filter to erase the password before it went to the security context. And this might be another bug in Spring Security. Usually the filter, and whenever you implement a custom filter, my recommendation is you don't keep the password, so you simply erase it. It shouldn't be available. Oh, this is not, sorry, it's our fault actually, because we took the password from the database and this should have been hashed. Okay, my fault. So I was blaming. You see, that's why you shouldn't blame anyone before you correctly make all the suppositions. I think credentials are null. Okay, so Spring Security is smart. Sorry for that. Sorry, Spring Security team, you are great. So credentials is null. Here is the password we took from the database, and it's fine. It's there. It's not a problem, because in a real world application it would have been hashed. So you would only see there the hash of the password, which is fine. It's just confusing for me because I don't usually see plain text passwords in applications. You remember I told you from the very beginning, it's only in our example here that it's plain text. Okay, so that's fine, and you see it worked correctly. And let me try also that, because I was trying to I promised you that I will show you why I added this fetch here. So if I'm going to take it out and try to reload the app, my expectation is that now it will fail to get the authorities, because usually I think the UserDetails service will be called and the transaction will be ended, and then in another session it will try to grab the authorities, but because the transaction was already closed previously, being that the list is lazy, it will not be able to take it anymore. So that's my expectation, but let's see if it's indeed what I'm... Okay, so it says for John, and indeed it's an exception, you see. And what the exception says is that I'm trying to lazily get the list of authorities, when the session has already closed. So you see, it's exactly what I was telling you. So that's why from the very beginning I made sure I made this fetch eager, because otherwise it wouldn't work, is it? So it simply wouldn't work, because the transaction of the get user by username has already closed, and then only after Spring Security tries to grab the authorities. So because of that, it will not be able anymore to grab the authorities, being it's not in a session anymore. If you make it eager, from the very beginning it also fetches the authorities, which really makes sense. So I would do this in a real world without any problem, and that's basically what and the reason why I from the very beginning used the fetch eager on the authorities. Okay, so I actually managed to create here with you a project even bigger than what I was expecting at the very beginning. We created our own user details service. I proved you not only how to store your details in the database, but I have even created stored the authorities and created a many-to-many relationship between the authorities and the user, such that a user may have multiple authorities and an authority might have been allocated to multiple users, which is great. We are 10 minutes over, but it's just because I had this very dummy problem with the many-to-many relationship, which I still don't understand. I will try to research why was this really needed, because I feel it shouldn't have been needed, but good that it was in the end working. As usually, I will put on GitHub the project, and that's, I guess, everything for today, folks. So thank you very much again for being here with me, so many of you. I hope you enjoyed and you understood this example step by step. We make a lot of progress, and with this being said, in the next time we meet, we will discuss most likely about adding authorization rules at the endpoint level. I'm still looking forward to your questions and looking forward to meeting you next Friday in the next lesson. Thank you very much. Have an excellent rest of the day and talk to you soon. Cheers.